Stepped away from the head table for maybe 3 minutes. That's all it took. My son's rehearsal dinner was on a Friday. The wedding was Saturday, and somewhere between the appetizers and the champagne toast, my daughter-in-law leaned across the table and told me, not asked, told, that she expected me to sign over the deed to the lake house by Monday morning. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. I picked up my glass, took a slow sip, and looked at her across the white linen tablecloth. I said very calmly, "That's not going to happen." She smiled at me. Not a warm smile, the kind of smile that meant she'd already decided how this was going to end. I should back up. My name is Edward. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years building a commercial landscaping company from a truck and a used mower into something that employs over 200 people across 3 states. My wife Beverly passed away 9 years ago from ovarian cancer. She was 54. I have never fully recovered from that, and I don't expect to. What I did do was pour everything I had left into raising our son, Colton, alone. I made sure he had the education Beverly always dreamed of for him, Georgetown for undergrad, Wharton for his MBA. I paid every dollar of it, not loans, not work-study. I tell you this not to brag. I tell you this because you need to understand what I was to my son before I tell you what happened on the day he got married. Colton met Amber 3 years ago at a charity gala in Philadelphia. She came from money, or at least from the appearance of money. Her father, Frank, presented himself as a retired real estate developer. Her mother, Patricia, wore the kind of jewelry that makes other women's eyes go still when they enter a room. They were polished. They were charming. They asked all the right questions about my company at dinner, laughed at the right moments, and made me feel like Colton had found himself a real family to marry into. I should have paid closer attention to what was underneath all that polish. The engagement was Colton's decision, and I supported it. I liked Amber well enough. She was sharp and put together and made my son happy in ways I hadn't seen since Beverly died. When he called me to ask if I'd help with the wedding costs, I said yes without hesitation. That's what fathers do. Beverly would have wanted that. What I agreed to pay for, the venue, the catering, the rehearsal dinner, the floral arrangements, and the honeymoon. The venue alone was $42,000. A restored 19th century estate outside of Charlottesville, Virginia. The catering was another $31,000. I didn't flinch. Colton was my only child. I had the money. Beverly would have loved every flower in that place. What I did not agree to, what was never discussed, never hinted at, never put on any list Amber emailed me over the preceding 14 months of planning, was signing over my property. The lake house has been in my family since 1987. I bought it the year Colton was born, with Beverly as a place we would grow old together. We spent every August there. Colton learned to fish off that dock. Beverly read on that porch every morning until she couldn't anymore. I scattered some of her ashes at the edge of the water on a Tuesday evening when the light was going gold. And I did it alone because I couldn't bear for anyone to see my face. That lake house is not a piece of real estate to me. When Amber made her request at the rehearsal dinner, and I do mean request in the loosest possible sense of the word, she framed it as a practical matter. The house was sitting empty most of the year, she said. Colton's company was growing, and they needed a weekend retreat, an asset, something to build their life around. She said it the way someone says pass the salt, like it was already settled and I just needed to catch up. I gave her my answer. She gave me her smile. We finished dinner. The wedding was at 4 o'clock the following afternoon. I arrived early, the way I always do. I stood in the back of that beautiful old stone hall and I watched them set out the centerpieces Beverly would have rearranged. She always rearranged centerpieces, and I let myself feel proud. My son was getting married. He looked like his mother around the eyes. That's the thing about Colton that breaks me open every time. He has her eyes. The ceremony was lovely. I walked my son to the altar. We shook hands and he hugged me longer than he usually does. And I thought, okay, this is okay. This is a good day. The reception was where it unraveled. We were about 90 minutes in. The first dances were done. Dinner had been served. The speeches were over. My business attorney, a man named Paul, who has known me for 20 years, had been sitting at a table near the bar when he caught my eye and waved me over. He'd received a call that afternoon about a filing issue with one of my holding companies. Nothing urgent, but he wanted me to know. We stepped outside to the garden terrace to talk. When I came back inside, Amber was standing at the edge of the dance floor waiting for me. I noticed immediately that the expression on her face was different from the night before. No smile. Something harder. She said she'd had time to think, and she'd decided that Monday was too long to wait. She wanted to discuss transferring the property that evening. She said, and I want to be precise here, she said that the longer I held onto that house, the more it looked like I didn't trust my son's judgment. I looked at her for a long moment. There were people dancing behind her, a band playing a song Beverly used to love, 220 guests filling that beautiful room. I said, Amber, I'm not discussing this tonight. This is your wedding day. She stepped closer to me and lowered her voice and said, you sign the papers or I will make the rest of this night very uncomfortable for you. I said, I beg your pardon. And then she slapped me. It was not a light slap. It was open-handed and hard, and it snapped my head to the side, and it happened fast enough that I didn't see it coming. A few people near us went completely silent. Someone behind me said, oh my God, very quietly. My right ear was ringing. I stood there for what felt like a very long time, but was probably 4 or 5 seconds. I did not yell. I did not touch her. I touched the side of my face once with 2 fingers, the way you check to see if something is real. Then I turned and walked toward the lobby. My son found me by the coat check. He must have seen something happen or heard something. I don't know. He came in fast and he grabbed my arm and he said, Dad, what did you do? I looked at him. He said, she's crying. Her mother is with her. What did you say to her? I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment. It was not anger exactly. Anger I could have managed. What I felt was something colder, a kind of settling, like when a building shifts on its foundation and you realize for the first time that it was never level. I said, your wife put her hand on my face in front of your guests. I didn't say anything to her. He looked at me. I could see him deciding what to believe, and I watched him decide wrong. He said, Dad, why do you always have to make things harder than they need to be? She's stressed. This is a big day for her. I straightened my jacket. I said, Colton, I love you. Enjoy your wedding. I walked out to the parking lot and I sat in my car. Paul came out 8 minutes later. I had already called my personal assistant, a woman named Iris, who has worked with me for 11 years and who does not rattle easily. I told Iris I needed her to contact our corporate counsel first thing Sunday morning. I gave her 3 specific instructions. She didn't ask questions. She said, I'll have it ready. Then I called Frank, Amber's father. He answered on the second ring. I didn't raise my voice. I told him what his daughter had done. There was a silence on the line that told me this was not the first time he was hearing about Amber's methods. He said he was sure there had been some misunderstanding. I said there had been no misunderstanding. I said I wanted him to hear it from me directly before the evening was over. Then I went home. That Sunday was quiet. I went to church. I had lunch at the diner I've been going to for 16 years. Corner booth, black coffee, the eggs I always order. I thought about Beverly. I thought about what she would have said to me. She would have been kinder about it than I was capable of being. That was always the difference between us. She had a softness I never fully learned. By Monday morning, Iris had 3 documents waiting on my desk. The first was a revised estate plan, removing Colton as the sole beneficiary of the lake house property and transferring it into a protected family trust that cannot be accessed, sold, or transferred by any spouse or in-law without the approval of a trustee. a role I assigned to my younger brother, Owen. Owen is a retired judge. He does not bend. The second was a notice of account restructuring. Since Colton graduated from Wharton, I had been quietly supplementing his income, a practice that is not uncommon among fathers in my position, but one I had never put conditions on. I had been depositing $22,000 annually into an account I set up for him, partly as a legacy gift and partly because Beverly asked me to before she died. That stopped on Monday. The third was a letter I wrote myself. Not legal language. Plain language. Plain language. I told my son what had happened in that hallway. I told him that I had not provoked his wife, had not raised my voice, had not made any remark that could be construed as threatening or unkind. I told him that she had struck me. I told him that I loved him, and that nothing about what I was doing was intended to punish him. I told him that I needed him to understand the difference between standing by his wife and standing by while his wife committed an assault against his father. I sent it by certified mail to his home address. I also had Paul hand deliver a copy. I did not contact Amber directly. I did not contact Patricia. I had no interest in what either of them had to say. What I did do, 3 weeks later, was call the Charlottesville venue to finalize the final billing, because my name was on the contract and several vendors were still waiting on payment. The florist, the lighting company, the valet service. I paid them. They had done their jobs and none of this was their concern. I paid every outstanding invoice and I kept the records. I want to be clear about something. I did not withhold payment from those vendors to make a point. I paid them because they deserved to be paid. I mention it because one of the things that happens when families break this badly is that the innocent people, the florist who drove 2 hours to set up 600 roses, end up holding the cost. I wasn't willing to let that happen. Colton called me on a Wednesday, about 4 weeks after the wedding. It was late afternoon. I was out on my back porch with a glass of iced tea, and when I saw his number, I let it ring twice before I answered. Not out of spite, just because I needed one more breath. He didn't apologize right away. That's not how Colton is built. He talks around things first, finds the edges before he gets to the center. We talked for almost 40 minutes. He told me Amber had a different version of events. He told me her family was upset. He told me her family was upset. He told me it had been a difficult few weeks. I listened to all of it. Then I said, Colton, do you believe me? Long pause. He said, Dad, I wasn't there when it happened. I said, there were people who were. Another pause. He said, I know. I said, I knew you to decide what kind of marriage you're building and what kind of son you want to be. I can't make that decision for you, but I want you to know that I'm still your father and I'm not going anywhere. What I won't do is pretend that what happened didn't happen. He said he'd call me again soon. I told him I'd pick up. It has been 7 months since the wedding. Colton and I have had dinner 3 times. We don't talk about Amber much. He knows where I stand. I think he is beginning to understand some things that are painful for a person to understand about the people they've chosen to love. The lake house is still mine. Last August, I spent 2 weeks there alone. I fished every morning off the dock the way I did with Colton when he was 9 years old. I read on the porch in the evenings. On a Tuesday night, when the light was going gold, I sat at the edge of the water for a long time and I talked to Beverly, the way I do when I need to think something through. I told her what had happened. I told her what had happened. I told her about Colton's eyes and how much they still look like hers. I told her about the slap in the parking lot and the Monday morning documents. I told her I had tried to handle it the way she would have been proud of. The water was still. I stayed until it was too dark to see the far bank. Then I went inside, locked the door behind me, and put on the coffee. Some things are not for anyone else to have. Not because I'm a hard man. Beverly would have argued that point with me. and she'd have been half right. But because there are places in a life that belong to the people who built them, and no one, not even someone you raised, can give those places away on your behalf. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten anyone. I didn't drag it through the courts or call her names or make speeches at the reception. I just made a few phone calls on a Saturday night, sat with my coffee on Sunday morning, and signed 3 pieces of paper on Monday. Sometimes the quietest move is the one they never see coming. I've been thinking about what actually causes a moment like that one. Not the slap itself. The slap was just the end of a long chain of smaller choices that nobody stopped. That's the part that stays with me. Amber didn't walk into my son's wedding and decide on the spot to put her hand across my face. That took years of being told yes when the answer should have been no. It took a father and a mother who smoothed every rough edge before she could learn anything from it. It took Colton, my own son, watching me write check after check and never once being asked to sit with the discomfort of wanting something he couldn't have yet. I'm not pointing fingers at anyone but myself when I say that. I was part of that chain too. I gave freely and I gave often, and I told myself that's what love looks like. Maybe it is. But love without limits doesn't teach a person anything about where other people's boundaries are. What I know now at 67 that I didn't know at 40 is that how you respond to being wronged matters more than the wrong itself. I could have caused a scene in that reception hall. I could have called her out in front of 220 people and made sure every one of them knew exactly what she'd done. Part of me wanted to. But that version of me, the one who yells, who performs his anger for an audience, that man doesn't get anything back. He just gets louder. And the people who wronged him feel like victims before the night is over. I walked to my car instead. I sat in the quiet. I made 2 phone calls. And on Monday morning, I signed 3 pieces of paper that said more than any speech I could have given at that reception. That's what I mean when I talk about intelligence in the face of a crisis, not book intelligence. The kind that asks, what do I actually want here, and what's the most direct path to it? I wanted the lake house protected. I wanted the lake house protected. I wanted my son to understand what happened. I wanted the people who'd done real work, the florist, the lighting crew, to be paid because they'd earned it. None of those things required me to raise my voice once. Colton is figuring things out slowly, the way people do when they've made a choice they can't quite admit was wrong yet. I don't rush him. That's his work to do, not mine. What I can do is stay steady, answer when he calls, have dinner when he's ready. Be the same man I was before any of this happened. Because the moment I become someone smaller in response to being hurt, she wins something she doesn't deserve. Beverly used to say that you can tell everything about a person's character by watching what they do when no one is holding them accountable. Amber had 220 witnesses and she still made the choice she made. That tells you everything. But I had those same 220 witnesses and I walked out quietly and handled my business in private. I hope that tells you something too. The lake house is still mine. The deed is in a trust. The water is still cold in August, and the dock still creaks in the same spot it always has. Some things you build don't belong to anyone else. Not because you're holding on too tight, but because you know exactly what it costs to build them, and you're not interested in handing that over to someone who never paid a single cent of that price.